And so tonight I'm going to be juggling between the phones and asking these guys questions. If you see me looking at my phone, I am not being rude and bored. I am looking at questions and comments that people have made. I can assure you of that. Now, before we crack on, Deb, just remind people who you are. Just tell us a little bit about yourself. You're married to Sam, job, kids. Just remind folks.
Yeah, so I'm married to Sam. I've got 2 kids, primary aged, Allegra and Zion, and live here in the centre of Sutton. Grew up in Brazil. I've been here for about just over 10 years.
And what do you do here?
I work for the church. I'm the discipleship team leader. Sorry, I just had to think about that.
Yeah. And what does that mean? Just tell us a little bit about your job.
So I work with small groups, one-on-one, some up-the-front stuff, helping people to work out what it means to follow Jesus in day-to-day life, making decisions out in workplaces, at home, wherever that might be, kind of trying to apply the Bible and looking at what the Bible means for us today.
Brilliant. And our subject is looking at creation. You're quite passionate about this. None of us profess to be experts about this, but this is a bit of a thing for you. It's something that's really gripped you and convicted you.
Yeah, I think it's really important. I think it's really biblical. We'll come on to that. And I think it's something key for us to get our heads around and then put into practice.
Brilliant. So we are looking at how do we care for our world. I want to just read a few statistics about some of the things that are going on in our world. So global CO2 emissions in 2020, so across the whole world, 34.07 billion metric tons. The biggest contributor to that in the world, which country do you think that has been? And this is since 1750. So which country do you think is the biggest contributor to CO2 emissions in our world? What are we going for? Been around for a long time. There's a clue in that.
See, I would go for the States, but then...
That would be a really good guess, Deb. That is the correct answer. It is the United States. Now, the UK has emitted more than 74 billion metric tons since 1750, which roughly represents 5% of the total CO2 emissions ever produced. So you look at that and you think we're not doing too badly, that's okay. But actually,
we're tiny.
But we are tiny, but that is a heck of a lot of CO2 emissions. Road pollution affects 94% of Great Britain. So most of Great Britain is affected by the pollution of our cars and vehicles on the road. The recycling rate of plastic packaging waste in the UK is currently at 42.3%. So that's not great. We've still got nearly 60% of stuff that we're not recycling. Not ideal. UK households waste 4.5 tons of food each year that could have been eaten. Now, that's not my household. Looking at me, I eat all the food in my house, rest assured. But we do waste a lot of food in the UK. If the citizens of the world lived like those of the United States, the resources of 5 full planets would be needed to satisfy the global need for resources every year. That is huge. So what about the UK? So if it's 5 for the United States, how many planets' resources do you think the UK would need? What are you going for, Donald? You're looking at me like I'm...
So if everybody lived like the UK?
Yep.
2.
You're going for 2? Ted, what are you going for?
Should probably be able to work it out from those numbers, but I can't remember them. I'm going to go with 3, just to be different.
It is 2.6, so Deb wins because she's slightly closer. She's slightly closer. Final statistic. 76% of UK residents feel not enough is being done at plastic pollution. So there seems in our country, it's bringing me on to my first question to get you thinking about this. It seems in our country that this whole area of creation is very, very much at the forefront of some people's thinking. So you have a group of people that I think are very outspoken, that are very much, I'm doing my bit, this is what I'm up to. You've got a group of people, I think, that think, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. But then you've got another group of people that actually don't care and are just carrying on with life. So as we look at this whole area of caring for creation, my first question is really simple. Why? Why should we care for creation? Why does it matter? We're not going to be here in 20, 30 years' time. Why does it matter how we treat our world? What would be your answers to that?
Who's going first?
I don't mind. You can fight amongst yourselves.
Shall I kick off on that? Okay, so I think that it's very, very clear that we believe that God made the world. Mm-hmm. If we look at the account of that in Genesis 1, 2, and 3, when God made the world, it was good. And the creation reflects God's character, his majesty, his power, his glory. It glorifies him. So creation is really, really important in the Christian faith to understand that it's not accidental, it's not random, it's a beautifully created thing. The second thing that Genesis tells us is that mankind was given a responsibility. And it's described in two different ways. In Genesis 1, the description and the command is to rule the planet. And that's where things have got a bit confusing in people's understanding of that word rule. The description, the command in Genesis 2, which actually is the same thing but is a different word, which is to take care of the planet. They were commanded to take care of the planet. And actually that is what rule means. That God, we believe that God rules the world. We believe that he is king. And that means is that he wants to bring about care and justice for everyone. So when God asks mankind to rule over something, what he means is, I want you to ensure that there is justice and there is care and that people are blessed. So God gave this planet to humanity to look after for the benefit of all humanity and to glorify God so that people can see creation. Therefore, it's not ours to destroy. It's not ours to carve up and only use for a wealthy minority. Our instruction was to look after it for the benefit of all mankind. So it's the very first thing that mankind is asked to do. It's an absolute priority, in my view, that we need to look after this planet in God's name, that his creation still is able to point people to God.
Debbie, have you got anything to add to that?
I think one thing that is at the bottom of a lot of how we've destroyed it and stuff is that we forget. So we believe that the world is God's, so it's not actually ours, which is behind this thing of caring for it. And when you look after something, or when someone gives you something, I've left my kids with my brother looking after them. Mm-hmm. If he said, well, I'll look after them how I like. I mean, if he looked after my kids how we look after God's world, I'd have something to say about it. And it's for some reason we take that out of context. And I think it is the word rule. Sometimes dominion is used. But actually, when we look at Jesus and the way that he came and showed us how he rules, it was servant. And are we serving, or are we taking what we can for ourselves? Because it's not for us, it's God's. And the other thing of why, for me, a big reason, is that when we read the Bible, we see that God has a bias to the poor, and he wants us to care for the poor. And the way that we are destroying the earth, unfortunately, has the repercussions are way bigger for the poorest in the earth. And so actually we're not caring for the poor when we're not caring for the earth, because actually we're all interlinked. When we treat the earth badly, there are repercussions in all, we see it all over the world, and unfortunately a lot of the time that affects the poorest.
Do you think people recognise that? So, you're well read on all of this, but do you think your average person recognises that what they do and what we all do, it may not affect them, they can't see the outworking of it? Do you think they recognise actually this has global implications and affects directly the poor?
I think a lot of people know it in theory, but they think it's too big a thing. How can I affect? How can I make any change in that? I think there's a lot of debate over climate change. Is it real? Is it actually a thing? But even if you totally take that out of the picture, if you look at the pollution that, say, fashion stuff causes to water in the poorest places, the water that they drink, that they use for washing things, if you look at soil degradation where they're farming and they depend on that food to eat and they can't because of the way that things have been treated, There's all kinds of material ways where actually it's just, I mean, you don't have to scratch very deep to see the effects of what we're doing, regardless of whether climate change is real or not.
Absolutely. And I think both of you make a compelling argument for why it is really, really important. And I suppose one of my reflections has been in preparing for this, is that there are some Christian voices out there that are standing up for this and are trying to lead the way. But in many ways, for me, I look back maybe over the past 10 years, and I don't think the church as a whole, I'm not saying our church, has been that outspoken on this issue. Do you think in 30, 40 years' time, generations are going to look back at our generation and your generation and ask some severe questions? You knew about this. Why didn't you do more? Why didn't you stand up more for it? Do you think that's fair?
I think when I first went to Christian leadership, I was saying exactly that. Because I often feel every generation has a blind spot. And I think that 20 years ago, it was a huge blind spot in the whole of culture. And the church just reflected the culture. And I was saying that. And I look back over things that I've done, and I realize that I think that people are listening to Christians now when they didn't listen to us before. So part of it is that. Certainly in my own life, I can look back. We could put solar panels up more than 10 years ago. We've done lots of different things, and I don't think people necessarily noticed or heard that, but I think now they are, and that's good. I don't think the world has looked to the church and asked this question. I know the Archbishop of Canterbury and people like that have talked about this for quite a long time, and I don't think the media picks that up. So I certainly think that the whole of culture has been blind, and I think that's probably been reflected in the church. But I do think Christians have been slightly ahead of the curve. Not much, but slightly. But I don't think that's popular in the media, so I don't think that's reflected. But that would be my perspective. But I could be defensive and biased, but I know my own thing, that I've been talking about this in this church for many years, but it's only in the last few years when I think people have listened or heard it to some extent.
You came up with a wonderful fact, didn't you, that we run a holiday club here for children and young people every year. Tell us what was going on in 2003, was it?
So 2003, we did the whole thing was around recycling, and because I've always believed recycling was really, really important, and the wastage that humanity has been a big thing for me for years. And so, 2003, we did a whole thing, and we got kids bringing stuff in every day. That was when we went and got permanent recycling paper bins. We tried to have a bottle bank here, which we did for a little bit. We tried to do all kinds of things at that point.
So you were a forerunner, weren't you? You were before your time.
I don't think I was a forerunner, because I don't think I knew, like now, I don't think I know enough. I think that for me, if you read Genesis, you have left but no alternative to say, my job is to care for this planet. I can't see any other way of reading that passage. And wastage and pollution has been a serious issue for me for many, many years.
I suppose it's a juggling act as well for Christians, isn't it? You can read the Bible and be challenged on every page over every issue.
Yeah.
And it's trying to work out, and we're going to come on to the practicalities of this, what can I do in a sustained manner as part of my rhythm, as part of my lifestyle, that I can maintain and keep on going. Because the Bible is full of challenges about everything, whether that's sharing your faith, whether that is caring for creation, whether that's forgiveness, whether that is standing up for the rights of the poor and the oppressed. It's all there. So how do you begin to feed this into an already very busy and cluttered life of someone that looks at it and thinks, oh, my life, this is a global problem. Where do I begin? And you came up with something that I'd never heard of. And what's it called? It is eco-anxiety. Explain what eco-anxiety is, because there's a few people out there that experience this, and maybe some relate to it.
Yeah, it's a growing thing where people who are aware of these problems and who they look into it, and it paralyzes them, it gives them anxiety. So where you might have health anxiety, instead of that, it's eco-anxiety. So they just feel like it's too big, I don't know what to do. and it's overwhelming me. The world is going to, I don't know, burn up in flames, and I'm panicking here. And it is a growing problem where it kind of paralyzes people rather than encouraging people to be proactive in it.
I do think sometimes, as I'm recycling things, I do wonder what's going to happen to this, and is it really going to make a difference? That often goes through my head, because sometimes I love our dustmen, but sometimes it all goes into the same thing, and they don't have the resources just because of lack of workers and everything else. I'm not blaming them, but you do wonder what difference can I make? People do ask that question. Really, is it going to change the world?
I think if everyone thought that, there wouldn't be 40-something, whatever you said, % recycled. So I do think it's a cumulative thing. And I think, God gives us whatever it is that we've got, whether it's a house and a garden with the shopping that we get and the food that we eat. And he gives us those things, and he says, use this and care for this in the best way that you can. What's the best you can do to care for this well? And I think if we think of it as, everything I have is God's, how can I best use this and care for it, then we would recycle everything, regardless of, these are the things he has given me. If we see everything as gifts, these are the things he's given me. What's the best I can do with it?
That's very countercultural though, isn't it? We live in a society where this is mine. Do you know what I mean? I'm going to have more, I'm going to have more, I'm going to have more. And do you think there's a need sometimes for those of us that are Christians to be praying, God, would you give me the right heart? God, would you help me with this? Because I am materialistic. I do have all these things. This is my empire. This is mine. And it's very easy to do that, isn't it? You put your trust in yourself and what you have. And do we need help with getting to that point of a softness, a broken heart for the world and for the environment and for what's going on?
Yeah, I think there's people that aren't Christians that do have a broken heart for this. So I don't think it's that can't happen. I do think it's countercultural that the motivation behind it isn't me. It's not me. It's not even, it is, but it's not even just, my kids and the world that they'll have. It's far bigger than that, because it's serving, because that's what Jesus asked us to do, is to serve. But I also think there is, even if you don't believe in God, there's a pride that you can have in using things well, in caring for things well. If you feel the things that you have no worth, that's going to have an impact on you and your self-esteem and everything. And actually looking at things as this is something, it's a gift. It's wonderful God's given me this, tin of tomatoes. I can use this and recycle this. That's a tiny example. I can be thankful for it. I can eat it in a healthy way. It covers so many different topics. And I think when you say, bringing this into a busy life, for me, what's made a difference is that it's not, I'm not looking after the world isn't my one thing. It's interweaved into everything, and that's what makes a difference. So slowly, over time, building things in, looking at things, and suddenly clicking things. So sometimes, it's something I've not thought of, and suddenly it sparks, because it's almost like a lens of how you look at things, and so it slowly changes. It's all interweaved. It's not something you add on. It's a different way of viewing it, and for me, anyhow.
And I think, talking about making a difference, I think there are three things, and I don't think you can underestimate how powerful they are. So firstly, if you simply live a lifestyle that for you is not wasting and not polluting and not damaging, that's a thing. Now that may feel very insignificant, and in itself, in its isolation, it's less significant. But the second thing is that if that lifestyle is noticed by the half dozen, 2 dozen people that you live around and who know you, and they begin to think, oh yeah, maybe I don't need to buy that thing with that packaging. Maybe I can walk to work. Maybe I can make jeans last longer. You slightly influence 10, 15 people. That's all you need to do, because the most significant thing that changes is popular opinion. And over the years, there's no doubt that governments are changed by popular opinion because they want to get elected. And so are big businesses. They don't want to lose custom. So when it becomes the general opinion that whatever the change needs to be, whether it's plastic cups, whether it's whatever that thing is, it does change. And we can change government policies. And I think we've seen that over the last 5 years, and I think we can continue to see that. And the way we vote and the way we tell politicians what are the issues that matter to us is really important. And we talked about this before, and the whole thing, because it is linked with the poor, but this whole thing that we talked about before about standing up and saying, I don't want lower taxes, I want fair government. And if we try and influence and vote for what is best for everybody instead of what is just best for me, then we really do change the world. And I really do believe that change can happen. At the same time, and we talked about this, Deb and I, earlier, the world is decaying, and Jesus will return, and he will restore it. We're not saying we can make it perfect, but we can do what God asked us to do. YouGov
did a poll in March of this year, and they said, which policies to combat climate change have public backing? So the most supported one, with 56% of people, was making air travellers pay more in taxes the further they fly. So again, it's trying to hit people's wallets. And then the next one was 51%, banning the sale of new petrol and diesel cars from 2030. The next was 41% of people said banning gas power stations. And it goes on like that. But it's interesting what people, this is the government have taken hold of this and are reflecting on it, and will look at their policies in this whole area going forward, which is what they've said. But interesting, the advice that people are speaking into the government, and they are listening. So the last few years they've had, I think it's 7 things that the government said they were going to do. They've nearly met all of them, not quite. So they are listening. I think they're recognising this is a big issue that gets votes, which is a really good thing. I mean, they don't recognise that on someone's wallpaper and what they paid for something to be refurbished. But this, sorry, being political, this does seem to be something that's on their agenda.
I think so. I remember when I first started being interested in this, I remember government saying wind power is pointless. It will not make any difference. And that we will have to use coal and gas for the foreseeable future. Now, within 20 years, that policy's changed. And that's public opinion, plus science, plus all kinds of other factors. But it does change.
I think it changes across the board, doesn't it? Your big multinational companies, down to PG tips. So there were complaints about their tea bags, that they weren't biodegradable and there was bits of plastic in them. And so now all of their tea bags are biodegradable. You just think even a tea bag, they have thought about, they have heard the public clamour for it, and they have changed it to be biodegradable. So it is possible, and people do listen. So one of the things that we need to do is to speak out, and we'll maybe come back to that towards the end. But Deb, kick us off with what are some of the practical things? You talked about seeing life through a kind of like a different lens and just interweaving things into life. Begin to talk about what that might look like. How might we do it practically?
I'm in no way perfect, so don't put me on a pedestal of any sort. But just going on the teabag thing, one thing, I watched a documentary, it's linked into this, I watched a documentary called Kiss the Ground, which I'd really recommend. It's not that long, it's on Netflix, or it's something like 78 pence on Vimeo, if you don't have Netflix. All about the importance of the soil. So if you go for the teabags, composting, if you can look at composting, it's such a good thing to look into, but basically the power of earth and how actually it's a really hopeful thing as well. So when you think about eco-anxiety, this Kiss the Ground, it's actually quite a hopeful documentary, and it's looking at how the earth is actually the best technology we've got for reversing some of the damage that we've caused, because actually carbon gets basically trapped in the earth, and that's a good way of storing it. And it's all about investing in good soil and making good soil, and how we can do that, and how people are doing that, and the kind of food we eat and all that kind of thing. It looks at all sorts of stuff. It's really well done documentary. So composting, really good. It visibly reduces waste, and I didn't think.
What is composting? To someone that's unsure as to what you're
So
talking about.
So tea bags, for example, but like vegetable cuttings or bits of waste. There are things you shouldn't put in it, and there's debate over that, and you can get more complicated. But actually, I think if you
put it in
do
a
it, it's better. So we put it in like a little bucket in our kitchen with a lid, and then we have a thing called a wormery. So it's basically, it's a upcycled tub that is stuck into the ground, and it's bottomless. So we put stuff in, and it kind of worms eat it and do, I don't know exactly the science behind it, and you turn it every now and then. I mean, in the middle of summer, so we stopped for a bit because we had a problem with flies at one point. It all got very hot. But you turn it and stuff. But Sam was saying our stuff from last year has turned into great soil, really good earth.
I don't know whether it's true now, but we got ours about 10 years ago. It was free from Birmingham City Council. You just asked for one, and they were giving everyone a free composter.
And that's another place where you want to affect public. So I would love it, because like my sister lives in Manchester in a flat. So she doesn't have a garden or anything, but they have a little tub, and they put their compost, and that's a separate. So like we have the recycling, paper, plastic, and normal rubbish. They also have a compost one, and some councils have that, and we don't have that, and that would be a really good way of reducing the amount that we're incinerating.
Yeah.
And actually earth is, like I said, watch this documentary, but it's a really good thing to invest in. And yeah, I've taken ages on composting.
No, that's good. So you've got a composter as well?
Yeah, and a water butt. I think that was free from the council
Yeah,
as
we
well.
got one free. Yep.
I think it's worth highlighting that I think God created the planet in balance, that we would we do create some carbon dioxide. That's inevitable,
With 16% carbon. Carbon's not all bad.
Yeah, so it's not that human beings have a carbon footprint. The problem is that we've systematically reduced creation's natural offsetting by the destruction of the rainforests, and then we are consuming more than is reasonable per person. So it's a double combination. So I think tackling reforestation, tackling ensuring that the planet is green and that we do look for it is part of the thing, without feeling hugely guilty.
So we've got the Kiss the Ground, the programme on Netflix/Vimeo, composting. What else can we begin to think about doing?
So just things that you have that are plastic, thinking of replacements. So, for example, I use a bar shampoo instead of shampoo in bottles, little things like that you can make change. We also buy a lot of stuff in bulk, which not everyone can do, but we buy a lot of stuff in bulk, so actually there's less packaging to it. We try and find alternative ways. So like our toilet roll doesn't have any plastic packaging in it, and there's various companies that do that. It comes wrapped in paper.
You don't recycle it?
Sorry?
No.
No, just the middle bit, or the wrapper, I guess, not the actual no. Although,
How old
if
are
you want to be really
I
radical,
apologise, folks. I apologise.
my parents have a composting toilet, so
There you
they have a lot of vegetables and stuff that grow very well, but we won't go into that.
Which of them clears that out?
My dad
Oh,
definitely
good old
empties the
Mike.
bucket. I'm pretty sure my mum doesn't. Yeah.
We love Mike. So you have toilet roll that doesn't have any plastic packaging.
So just looking at items around your house, that's one thing. Reducing, like you looked at waste, so trying to buy the right amount of food and using the right amount of food. And I guess, like with kids, sometimes you just, maybe I'm not a very strict parent, but there are bits of food that we throw away. But again, composting helps with that.
Do you think on the whole food thing, there's a line of thought about carbon dioxide and eating meat, and the methane and the carbon and everything else that particularly cows produce, that actually just by not having meat once or twice a week would help the environment. Is that true?
Yes, if you think about the amount of area of ground that you'd need to grow the grain to feed the cows, and if you were to eat the vegetable equivalent, it'd be a lot less than what the cows eat. So yes, on that count. And we do try and reduce, so we try and not eat meat during the week, and we eat it at the weekend. So we aren't vegetarian.
Do you feast on it at the weekend when you get
we
to
try
eat
not
meat?
to, although occasionally that does happen, which is a bit counterproductive.
Does fish count? Can you eat fish?
So we do eat fish. It's a bit difficult with the kids. We're not so strict with the kids because I don't know enough to sort their diet. I don't want to harm their growth or whatever. But actually, we need a lot less meat than we think we need, protein-wise, or a lot less protein, whichever way you look at it. But actually, watch Kiss the Ground, because a much bigger issue is how that meat is, where those cows are, if you get what I mean. So actually, there's a strong argument behind cows that are reared amongst other crops and mixed. So they're not kept on, massive bare areas of just loads of cows that are grains brought in and given. They actually eat off the grass on the ground, and they're rotated around, and it's done very sustainably. And actually, that's actually productive because of the grass that grows and the carbon that gets trapped by that grass and it goes down into the earth. But you have to watch it. It's an interesting documentary.
What about as well the transportation of meat and other produce? Do you try and buy locally to cut out all of that?
Yeah, so when I'm going around the supermarket, I do look at fruits, and there's certain things. So fruits, for example, I'll look at the crate and try and figure out where it is, and I'll choose something that was, say, grown. I'll try and get British if I can. I have like a cut-off, and this is fairly random, so don't use this, but I have a cut-off at Morocco. I feel like it's Northern Africa. Partly it's a selfish thing because you can get a lot more if you go to there, whereas if you just stick with British. But we are very fortunate. We do have farms around where you can get eggs. Our milk's from quite local, from the Cotswolds, I think. So there is a lot we can buy from around here if you do your research. It can be slightly more expensive, but like we found, if we don't eat meat during the week, we can afford to buy better meat at the weekend that is, organic, grass-fed, that kind of thing, or from the butchers maybe. So it is a bit, you do have to sacrifice a bit or organise yourself a bit, but there are ways of making changes. And I do think what you eat is quite a big deal. Another thing is the power in your house. So what kind of tariff are you on? Where does that energy... So it's basically where demand comes from. So we all get our energy, I think, from the same power... Grid. Oh. But it's to do with demand again. So the amount of people demanding, say, green energy will mean that they'll up the amount that's going into the grid. Basically, it's to do with demand again. So if there's more people demanding that, they'll have to start increasing what they put into that. And again, it influences government, influences all sorts. And with government, just to add in, because I thought about this, there's a big conference type thing, I'm not sure what you call it, called COP21. It's happening in Glasgow, I think, in November. Which is governments from around the world. I think the last one was in Paris, I can't remember, but there's the potential for really significant worldwide agreements to be made. So prayer for that, campaigning for that. Especially if they can have conversations that convince, say, America and China and big players to join in there, it could make a really significant change. That's really significant gathering of world leaders that's happening.
It's interesting. In the YouGov poll, they asked, who would you trust more to sort out climate change in the world, Mr. Biden or our dear Prime Minister, Mr. Johnson? In the UK, we voted more for Mr. Biden than Mr. Johnson, which is hilarious because we don't really know anything about his stance on any of it. He said a few little things, but I just thought that's absolutely hilarious.
I mean, a couple of things on food, because I think food is really important. I think, we may have said this, but just to emphasize it, you colossally help by eating everything that you buy. and the amount of food that is
good at
thrown away because people buy more than they need, stick it at the back of the fridge, forget about it, that is a huge issue, and it probably offsets more than the cows and the whatever. It's just you don't need to buy as much. If you buy less, they produce less. If we produce less, we get back to a more reasonable thing. So one of the problems is that human beings are consuming more than they need. We're not actually consuming it. We're buying it and throwing it away.
Yeah.
So that wouldn't matter to me if we consumed it, but we're buying it and not using it. So I think a huge thing, which I really feel strongly about, is don't waste food. Do not waste food. But the other, this is my little tip, which I've discovered recently, is because I do the shopping in our household, and I use the gun, so I self-thingy.
I was thinking a gun.
So so the big supermarket, you go around and you scan the barcode yourself.
Shooting rabbits in Sutton Park.
No, I understand you now. I was a bit shocked for a second. I thought you were going hunting.
Yeah. So you go.
Yes. So I
yeah.
would always look for British stuff if I can, but the vegetables, I will put the vegetables on the scales. The thing comes out, little ticket comes out, I scan the ticket, and then I just put the vegetables in my bag, and I don't use any of their plastic bags to put them in, and I just stack all the stickers on the top of my shopping bag.
Great.
And
That is actually something to do with public opinion and demand, though, because for a while, you know how a lot of the stuff you buy is already packaged in plastic? Yeah. There's a lot more availability of stuff out of that because people clamoured for it.
Yeah.
I've got a question here from Joy Taylor. You'll be pleased to know it's not about pets going to heaven, but she says this. Have any of you seen Seaspiracy and Cowspiracy on Netflix? They talk about the detrimental effects on the climate by eating meat and dairy, not to mention the hideous treatment of cows, pigs and chickens. What are your thoughts on this? So we've talked a little bit with your Kiss the Ground about that. But in caring for the world, I suppose this is another angle that some people would come in on. Is it right to eat meat? Is it right the way that some animals are kept? Is it right the way some animals are killed? I know we're going slightly left field. Either of you want to speak into that?
I think unnecessary cruel treatment of animals. So I'm not against eating meat. Sorry, Joy. I think she's a vegetarian.
Yep.
But I think unnecessarily cruel treatment because we want a slightly lower price, because we want animals kept in bulk that make it really cheap and easy. I don't think that's all right. Because I think, again, it's about caring for the earth. Why do that? You know, for me, that's not okay. So I don't, and I also think it's proven that that's not healthy anyhow. You know, hens that are kept one on top of the other, pooing on each other and getting all kinds of illnesses and then having to be filled full of antibiotics and stuff. It's just not healthy for us anyhow, if you were just thinking about us.
Yeah.
But I also think unnecessarily being cruel to an animal also isn't. But I don't have a problem with killing an animal to eat it.
I mean, you go and shoot rabbits, so you're all right with that, aren't you?
No, I've never shot anything. I would not. What I would say is that we, for a number of years, went on holiday to folks who ran a farm and had cattle and sheep in Devon, and they also had a holiday home. And the care that and love for those animals was great. Okay, those animals were ultimately killed for meat, but they didn't have unhappy lives until that point. That's not to say that's not true of everything. And I think I would agree 100% with Deb. I think I can understand as a Christian to take the stance to be vegetarian or vegan is absolutely fine, but I don't think it's necessary as a Christian, but I can understand why folks do. And I think we should do all we can to ensure that animals are treated fairly. And the point really I'm making about this farm is that they manage that. You can do that. You can look after animals well, and they don't need to be stacked on top of each other and harmed. And I think we should avoid, where we know that's going on, we should boycott those things.
The better you look after them, the sadder I would be to see the end of them. Like if you give them names and you go and talk to them, I wouldn't be able to.
It's interesting. I was going to say, on the food thing that Donald was talking about, another thing which I think, particularly if you have kids, that I think is a really valuable thing is to help them appreciate food and where it comes from. Actually, if you're able to plant, even if it's a few carrots or potatoes, whatever it might be, to plant that, and they see the process of it growing, they can harvest it, they then eat it, and just the appreciation that brings helps them to value what goes into, because it's so easy nowadays for kids to think that milk comes from plastic bottles, or glass bottles in our case, that fruits come from the shelf on Sainsbury's or Aldi or wherever. And actually seeing that helps them to appreciate it. I personally think you're then less likely to waste it, because you see the work that goes into it. Even though, with my garden, I'm not going to be able to feed our family, but doing a little bit like that. And I think when you come to the thing about animals, the better you treat them, the less likely. I actually grew up in a place where people kept animals, and they might have had, a few goats, a few chickens. Not huge. Some people had a lot, but a lot of them didn't have loads. And they looked after them fairly well. It wasn't like as well as they looked after themselves, sort of thing. But it's interesting that there wasn't this thing of pitying killing an animal, because actually they saw it was like with their crops and with everything, it was part of their food, and it was just a natural cycle. So I actually think being close, and if you go to farmers' kids, they don't have that as much, and they'll have, they're really close, they'd have dogs and they'd have all that kind of thing. And I'm not sure that being closer to the system necessarily has the same outworking, but it does help you appreciate it and understand it and see it's very easy for us to feel removed and think, I'm not linked in with the natural world at all. I've got I don't have any dependency on them. I just go to Aldi and pick it up off the shelf. But actually to teach ourselves, but also our kids, that is a really valuable thing, just for them to understand that link and that closeness that because of cities, we've created a distance.
I mean, Joy's come back and has talked about how you're bang on where meat is concerned, and caring for the animal and treating them fairly. And a lot of why she became a vegan was some of the other practices. And she's listed a few here that some people might be eating their supper, so I won't read those out, but I can, if people are interested, forward them onto them later. And, the things that she talks about are horrific, and we wouldn't wish any animal to go through that. And we recognise there has been a history of that in different places, and it's not right. So we're not advocating that at all. We're advocating that animals actually are treated fairly and with kindness, and we respect them as part of God's creation, and they're not just a piece of meat that we can kick about and do whatever. So we understand why Joy has made this decision to become a vegan, but she completely takes totally what you're saying. So
and I think a big part of that, again, coming back to that, we think the earth is ours to exploit, and selfishness, and so you get often when that happens, it's massive organisations. It's not a family farm, and agribusiness where they chuck on more and more pesticides and all sorts, and basically ruin the earth, the animals, and it's it's where it's on a massive scale, and that does have a reputation for really not being sustainable and ruining things and not treating animals or land kindly.
Dave Coles has sent a link in to say that we have 52.8 years of natural gas reserves left, that we still have gas and coal left by this. We still have gas and oil left by the time oil runs out in 2052. David says oil will run out in 2060 and coal in 2090. So basically what he is saying is that we're getting towards the end of our reserves of these things. So the way that we look at fuel, the way that we look at fueling businesses in our homes is really important. I switched my gas and electricity tariff to one that was more expensive because it was better for the environment. And it's not greatly more expensive, but I'm fortunate that I live in a privileged position that I can be able to do that I wanted to make a choice, that I wanted to go for this company because having researched it, I knew that they would use the most eco whatever to provide my energy. And I think there's other things that I've done in my house, but they've all been a little bit more expensive. So it's okay when we begin to think about making changes. We can buy food that maybe is a bit more expensive or whatever because it's been treated kinder or whatever. This is very middle class. This is very much for those that have money. What about those that are slightly less wealthy? This is far harder for them to achieve. How would we speak into that and into their lives?
I mean, I think I start off by, I think that's absolutely true, but I'd also think that as middle class, we consume more than the poor. Mm-hmm. Therefore, we're causing more of the problem. We are more likely to fly in an aeroplane. We are more likely to drive pointlessly. We are more likely to waste food in our fridge. Therefore, I'm not too broken-hearted for us as middle class that more of the burden falls on us, because we, you know, if America's the biggest nation that's called, it's also the wealthiest. Yep. It's not rocket science. They're two. We are more able to make a difference because we cause more of the problem. That's my kind of take on it.
Another thing I think's important to keep in mind, because I totally agree with that, is that often the people that we listen to out in the media and all that kind of thing, and they're really helpful and they've got really helpful things to say, they're often middle class as well, and that's right, because they, you know, we need to be leading the way as the people that are ruining the most and everything. But I think it's really important also to listen to people who are in other groups who are being affected by this. So a big point that people are putting out, there's a thing called intersectional environmentalism or something, and it's basically how it affects all kinds of other areas. So just because you're campaigning for environmentalism doesn't mean that you forget about gender inequality or racial discrimination, because they all are really interlinked. And one of the really important things to do is to listen to the people who are affected the most. And the people worldwide who are affected the most are people who are a different colour from me, a different class from me, a different income from me, a different nationality from me. And so it's really important to find people. And it takes a bit of work and research, and because there are people, there's all kinds of activists and leaders in these areas that come from nations that have been really affected by some of these problems, and to listen to them and see what they're saying and what they're asking for as well, because I think the middle class English people have got a lot of good things to say, and they've got a lot of really helpful things to say, but just to make sure that we are listening to the people who are most affected by it.
Do you think it's our children and our young people today are better educated in this than generations above them? Do you think it's something that is just interwoven naturally into their thinking, into school, that whole side of things?
It's definitely in their minds. So my kids, it just comes out in unexpected. And there's a video of kids doing things on Sunday in our 10:30 live stream, and Zion says something that makes it sound like he's got a militant eco mother, which I'm not, and I don't. He understands the shortcomings of what he's said, but immediately his thought went to environmental issues, and they have like the eco ambassador or something in their classes, even in primary school. It's just built in at which didn't happen when I was a kid, so it's definitely in their thinking, and like they enjoy watching things with David Attenborough and stuff, but even the little kiddie programs that they are thinking, like they watch one Go-Jetters and Octonauts, and it has environmental stuff all woven into their little cartoons and stuff. So I think it's definitely more in there.
Whereas Line of Duty doesn't have anything about the environment in it, does it? It's a bit of a shame. Do you watch Line of Duty?
No.
Neither of you watch it. It's too scary for you both.
Your kids presumably don't watch it either.
No, definitely not.
Who is H?
Sam does, I think.
Yeah, Sam does watch it. Donald, what would you say into that? I mean, the younger generations are probably far more up on this. You look at Greta, what's her name? Greta Thunberg.
I think for a long time children have been. I mean, I've been doing schools work for many years. It was slightly different, but 20 years ago, it was big in schools about picking up litter, about not wasting things. I think we've always taught children stuff that as adults we weren't prepared to do ourselves. And I think we've now got enough people who've come through saying, well, why do you teach us that as a kid and then ignore it when you get older? So I think schools for a long time, in my view, have taught care for the environment, rightly so. And it's now right that we all listen to that.
So we're at a bit of a tipping point, aren't we, as a country, that more people are pushing towards that than are ignoring it.
Yeah.
Which is really exciting, and it's where we should have been probably 10 years ago, but we are making progress.
Yeah.
Interestingly, you talked about flying and things like that, and your carbon footprint and everything else. Should we be flying? Should we be doing things like that? Should we be offsetting it if I go in an airplane? Should I offset it with something? Where do we stand on things like that? Because I quite like going to different places and, jumping on a plane.
I think that God, we are going to have a carbon footprint, and God created a planet that would offset it. So I don't think we can get rid of every element. I think we need to make sure that what we're doing is necessary. But Deb, you know a lot more about offsetting.
Yeah, so I've signed up to a thing. It's a little app called Climate App with a K. And it just very roughly, you answer a few questions, and it very roughly estimates your carbon footprint. And it's interesting because it puts you as to whether you're above, below, average in the UK.
Have you done it?
Yeah.
Where have you come out at, Deb?
Slightly under, because I don't have a car.
Okay.
But I do tend to fly once a year on a short haul. In the past, I would have been higher up because I did long haul to Brazil to visit my parents.
Yes.
And it estimates that, and then it is an offsetting organisation. So I think you have to look into how they spend their money and look at it. And I feel like this company is good, but you've got to make your own decisions.
Other ones are available.
Yeah, other ones are available, basically. And so then they give you an amount that will then offset. So if I pay per month, it's not like, it's under £10. You pay an amount per month, and you can choose what kind of projects that will go to. So reforestation, there's one that's like cook stoves that are good, environmentally friendly. There's another one, something else. I think it's solar panels or something. And you choose which kind of things you want your money to go to. And it's just a really easy way of doing that. So I think personally, ideally, we wouldn't have to offset because we'd live in a way that don't need to. But the way that our society is set up, it's almost impossible. I mean, I'm not going to say impossible, almost impossible. So I think that's an easy, helpful way. Another good app is WWF have one called My Footprint, and it's got loads of different things that you can do on there. So you can calculate your footprint, I think more accurately probably on that one. I haven't looked hugely into it, but it gives you loads of tips, loads of practical ideas of how you can reduce it, how you can do things that are helpful, what kind of things you can invest in, all those kind of things. So there are two apps, Climate App and My Footprint, that are really helpful, worth having a look at. On the flying thing, like I said, I used to fly 3 times a year. When I was at boarding school in England, I used to fly 3 times a year from England to Brazil. So I had a huge carbon footprint. And I think for me, it's you look at your faith and the things that are important. So, Jesus said, love God and love your neighbour. And I think that caring for the planet means that I have to do that because I'm loving my neighbour and I'm loving God who created it. So I think that is huge in there. But it also, my parents were in Brazil, and there's various reasons. And I think for each person, you have to come up with your reasons. For us now, my parents are in Portugal. I think it's really important, the relationship between my kids and my parents, and also for them to see different ways of doing life. And that is a privilege, and not everyone has access to doing that. But to go places and for your kids to understand there are different ways of living and doing things, and for us to understand that there's different ways, I think is a really valuable thing in raising awareness. But also, I don't think that you can... I just think it's really important to be creative in how we look at doing things. So we were looking at interrailing to Portugal, and then COVID hit. But looking at ways of combining the two things. So we want to see my parents, we want to show them different ways of doing things, but actually there are ways, and not everyone can do that. But also, sometimes going in England. England's great. Everyone's going on holiday in England now. But actually there are... So I think it has to be a decision for everyone. I wouldn't condemn someone that takes an aeroplane journey or that drives. I don't have a car, but I live right here.
I think flight is a wonderful God-given invention that has made so many positive things. To me, the bigger issue is our destruction of the rainforests, and so that's why I think offsetting. But I would go, controversially, I'd go a little further. I think one of the dangers of offsetting is you think, I've done my bit because I've offset mine. I think it's a good idea to look at how there are projects that are reforesting the world, and double your footprint, 3 times your footprint. In other words, make up for some of the other idiots that are making a mess of our planet. So the danger of offsetting is you think, I've done my bit. And I think we need, in order for to allow us to continue, I like driving, I find it pleasurable. To allow us to be able to do those things, we need to go beyond just my footprint.
It's also got to be in conjunction with trying to change your lifestyle.
Absolutely, minimise.
Not saying, I'm going to offset it so I can do whatever the heck I like.
Throwing at it.
Yes.
I'll fly 5 times a year and do whatever the heck. Well,
a little thing that my boys put me onto is, I don't know whether it's any good or not, but I'm sure other ones are available. There's a search engine called Ecosia, which we use. And
I use that on my phone and on my computer.
So basically they plant trees with the advertising. So it's a really good idea every now and then just to click on an advert. You know you're not going to ever buy that thing, but it makes that company pay for a tree.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Ecosia. So
Ecosia.
Yeah. I don't know how you say it, but that helps them to spell it if they're looking for it. It's a search engine. If you use that instead of Google, even if you just use it to go to Google.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. They still get money. They still plant trees.
Yeah.
I wonder, though, how many rogue companies are out there that are saying, we'll help you offset your footprint and take a load of money.
Yeah, I think that's why you have to look into them.
I might go into that. That's quite a lucrative business, isn't it? Anyway, before I get sacked, we're coming into land. Anything else that you want to just say on this whole subject? Something that's burning in your mind that you haven't yet shared with us?
Just while we're pointing people towards things, Arosha is a Christian charity. Is it a charity? I don't know. Christian organisation that are into all these kind of things. They've got really good teaching. Some of their leaders have written really helpful books. So there's a guy called Dave Bookless that wrote a book called Planet-Wise, which is really good on all of this. Really insightful book. Not difficult to read. But even just sign up for their emails, Arosha, because they have really good tips in their emails. But they do really good projects all over the UK, but all over the world as well.
I find receiving emails really helpful. Because from time to time I get just sidetracked into my own world and my own way of doing things. Then you get like, okay, I could do that.
And even if you don't read them every time, sometimes
you just need a prompt, and I find that really helpful. So it's Arosha. How do you spell Arosha?
And then space, Rocha.
Well done, Deb. Could you have spelled that?
I didn't know how to space. I thought it was one word.
I'm pretty sure it's 2 different things. It's a
right.
Portuguese word. It was founded in Portugal.
Linguist between us all. Anything you'd say, Donald?
I just reuse.
I mean, your wardrobe is reused, isn't it?
The fashion industry is a huge polluter.
Absolutely.
It's a huge problem.
Charity shops are great.
Yeah, charity shops. You don't care about fashion any longer.
Did you ever care about fashion?
No.
So reuse.
I mean, you try and look. You try and look reasonable. Although a number of people have been telling me that I look homeless.
That's
mainly when you're
I'm
out
wearing my
walking
coat.
your dog.
apparently when I'm wearing my
Oh, yeah,
coat
you
with
do
my
look a bit-
rucksack,
Yeah.
with a hat on.
Well, people don't recognise him.
That's why he does it. He talks about going shopping, and you put your headphones in, don't you, when you're going shopping, so you don't have to talk to anybody.
It's not because I don't want to talk to him, because I enjoy listening to podcasts.
No, we know.
But no, see, I really think, if you can use wood again, if you could use clothes again, if you can shop from a charity shop, it's really big.
If you can walk a little bit more.
And there are so many options around Sutton now. I mean, there's the wood shack on Ryland Road. Well, actually, I think you have to go around to get in, but it does have an entrance there. It's wood that's been upcycled, the Jericho project.
Deborah has muted herself. Apologies to the podcast and to everybody. She back on? Sorry,
Is the
everybody.
battery gone?
Is the light meant to be on or off? Now I'm
there
on.
we go.
There we go.
We're back on. Back in the room. Talking about the wood shack.
Just saying, there's the wood shack here in Sutton. If you need wood, they'll measure it up, they'll cut it for you, and it's so much cheaper, but it's reused, recycled. Charity shops are great. Use creativity in it.
Reusers, Jericho project.
Yeah,
they're brilliant. Brilliant.
Or skip fishing, which I don't do, but I know others in the church do.
Skip fishing.
So you just see a skip outside somebody's house, and you take from it what you think you can use.
My brother found
that
an
not
incredible. No. So you
because
can ask them.
You can ask them, but if it's in the skip, it's rubbish.
But also, there was a stainless steel. Is that what it's called? One of these really heavy pans on someone's drive. So my brother rang the doorbell and asked, and they said, no, we don't want it. We looked it up. It's worth like 100 and something quid new. Anyhow, we're using it loads.
There's a neighbour of Richard's who's filming who regularly puts things out on the pavement outside. Says, "Please have."
Yeah.
That's different to stealing out of a skip.
It's not stealing out of a skip.
He did say he doesn't do it.
It annoys me if I've got a skip out and people come rummaging.
Why?
You could put more in it.
Property.
It's being recycled.
What's been chucked? Oh,
Put a sign on it, say, help yourself.
okay.
Are you protective over your rubbish?
Yeah, I don't want someone going through my rubbish.
Well, don't put anything in there that you don't want people to rummage through.
My life. What's wrong with you two? I knew she was bad, but you've just taken it to another level. Final question. As a Christian, do you think that there should ever be a point when we look at our lives and we repent for not having cared for God's world and just recommit ourselves?
Yep.
Is that a yes?
Yep. I did a devotional on Earth Day, and that has a prayer in it, precisely for that, and I talk about the importance of that. The fact is we have messed up, all of us. I don't think there's anyone that can say I know there isn't anyone that can say that they haven't.
And I know we talked about this not being an exclusively Christian thing, but actually for those of us that struggle to keep it as the priority and to have the heart of God in it, there is the need to pray and to say, Holy Spirit, transform me, transform the way that I see the world, transform my attitude to what I can do. May I see it differently. May you challenge me, may you spur me on, because I think we do get lost in ourselves and our lives at times, and we need that extra power and input from God.
And I think, even if the planet was fine, God is very clear about greed, how it damages us as human beings and how it damages our community. The fact that we're messing up the planet by being greedy is a double whammy. But even if we weren't, we need to repent of our greed, that we consume or buy more than we need, and that there are people around the world who don't have enough. It's unacceptable.
Joy Taylor has come to your defence. We love Joy. Good evening, Joy. Joy Taylor, I have a fire surround that I took off someone's drive, and all my bookshelves are out of a skip.
There you go. There you go. Don't laugh. It's real. I know a number of people.
It's a good way of recycling.
It's a real thing. It's good.
I can just see her at night going out, her and Amber. What can we nick tonight? Love it. On that bombshell, Can we thank everybody for joining us this evening? We could talk about this for hours. There's so much more. Deb's mentioned loads of great resources. This will be back online on Saturday, so you can check that out. Or email deb@stbc.org.uk if you want to talk any more about some of the things that she has talked about.